The London Metropolitan Police says it's facing a challenging situation as a large pro-Palestinian demonstration coincides with Armistice Day. Police say there's a risk of clashes with far-right groups and have set up an exclusion zone around the cenotaph. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has urged for a peaceful march in acknowledgement to those attending services to commemorate the end of First World War. For more on this conversation, we're now joined by South African BDS Coalition Coordinator Roshan Dadoo. Roshan, appreciate your time this afternoon. Just bring us up to speed with that march in the United Kingdom.
It looked like the biggest march there's been so far in London. And I think it's clear that the British government, with its complicit relationship with the apartheid Israeli regime, has been ratcheting up the hate speech prior to the march. That's been called out even by the Metropolitan Police themselves, when the equivalent, Suella Braverman, the equivalent of the Home Affairs Minister, talked about the Palestinian marches as mobs and decided that they practically asking for the march to be banned, which the Metropolitan Police did not do. The march took a different route away from the cenotaph, where the annual commemoration of the Armistice Day at the end of the First World War took place. And it seems to me appropriate that there was a march for peace right now when we're watching the genocide taking place in Gaza, a march for peace now and a remembering of what took place in the two previous world wars, as they do on this day in England every year, in the context of calling for a ceasefire, which the British government has so far refused to do.
Well, many Western countries have refused to call for a ceasefire. The United States obviously has acknowledged the need for some scaling down of the attack on Hamas. But let's talk about the possible pressure from this demonstration. You indicated that it was a large turnout. Will this put any pressure on London or any of the other superpowers?
I think it will, and I think also here in South Africa today we saw one of the largest demonstrations for Palestine, also calling for a ceasefire in Cape Town today. There was well over 150,000 people, and the pictures of the crowds there, it looked extraordinary. And I think, you know, when you think about it, people all over the world, ordinary people, are putting pressure on their own governments, and I think it will have an impact, certainly in Western countries, where the governments are taking such a complicit relationship with the genocide that Israel's conducting at the moment, definitely. And I think here too, the march set a series of demands to the Western Cape Premier, including, as we have been long saying, the closing of the Israeli embassy here in Pretoria. We recognize that the government has fortunately finally recalled diplomatic staff from our embassy in Tel Aviv already. There was no ambassador since 2018 when the downgrade resolution was implemented. But we think it's not enough to put pressure on that apartheid state and its people taking action all around the world. We've seen huge marches in other countries like Morocco in our continent, which has normalized relations with apartheid Israel recently. And it really is up to people's power, that is going to put pressure and is going to stand with the Palestinian people. I mean, it's so bad now. Yesterday we published a statement, having heard after some while of not hearing anything from our colleagues in Gaza. I mean, but today again the hospitals are being attacked. There's bombings of hospitals, fighting in hospitals. There's no fuel. Now people are literally starving. Bakeries have been bombed. It's really reaching a catastrophic point. And we have to, as people here in South Africa, as people in the UK, people in America, we saw the huge protests organized by the Jewish Voice for Peace in America. It's not about religion. It's about humanity. It's really a litmus test for international law and for humanity. And it is ordinary people around the world who are saying enough is enough. We want to see a ceasefire. We can't watch anymore these pictures rolling across our news screens of children being killed. It's now over 11,000 people killed in Gaza and at least 4,500 children out of that total. And yeah, I think the protests in London, the protests here, the protests around the world are what will ultimately put pressure on our governments to take action and force the apartheid Israeli regime to end this genocide.
Roshan, you talk about a litmus test for the international law, international criminal courts, amongst others, and I suppose that test has been failed. I mean, the numbers that you speak of the 11,000 that have died from what we are aware of, the majority of those, I think upwards of 90%, will include women and children. So only a very, very small percentage includes Hamas.
I don't think the international legal system and humanitarian law has failed altogether, but it's up to us now to put pressure to point out the hypocrisy, the way in which, when it came to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it acted very quickly and swiftly to implement the provisions of humanitarian law, allowing humanitarian corridors, to quickly use the ICC to call for prosecutions of Putin and his arrest, and of the freezing of assets of Russian oligarchs around the world, of kicking Russia out of international sporting events and FIFA and so on. So it's perfectly possible. It's up to us to now put that pressure on all across the world to say, we see what you're doing, we see the hypocrisy, and we demand that the same measures are taken, the same measures that can be taken very swiftly, and the same way in which international law can be upheld must be done now against apartheid Israel.
Well, Roshan, is that not failure of sorts? I mean, if this hypocrisy is apparent, if the International Criminal Court that you speak of only a few months ago acted rather swiftly, where there wasn't wanton killing of innocent civilians, at least not to the levels that we're witnessing in Gaza at the moment, and they acted very promptly. Now it's been a little over 30 days since this war broke out, and you've called it a genocide. We did not have a situation of a genocide, if you will, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Well, it's certainly testing the limits of our international system, definitely, but I think there's still a chance to put enough pressure. There's still a chance to push countries, and as we are in the ICC, on us to push in the ICC as well, our government and civil society, to ensure that that hypocrisy is called out, that we don't allow some lives to matter more than others, that we don't take action when it's people who we feel or the West feels are like us, and that the rest of the world we can just ignore and feel that those lives are less valuable. I think now people are putting pressure, as you mentioned, in the streets of London. It's never been seen before, that size of a protest, in solidarity with people in Palestine. And I think we can and we must keep up the pressure, and I think we will eventually push countries into having to take action.
So, Roshan, we've talked about London, which is what occurred today. We've also talked about demonstrations here in South Africa. There have been demonstrations similarly in the United States and other parts of the world. What can consumers do, ordinary citizens of various countries, do to put pressure on Russia? I mean, when we look at trade, the United States, countries like the UK, are amongst some of the larger trading partners with Israel. Is there a mechanism where citizens of these various countries who are pro-Palestine or totally against the wanton killing of innocent civilians put pressure on Israel in terms of trade to deal with this?
Absolutely, and we know that that's possible because it's exactly what happened in our struggle against apartheid when we made the call on the international community for boycotts, divestment and sanctions. So we know it's perfectly possible to put the squeeze on apartheid Israel, both politically and, as you say, economically. Of course, as ordinary people around the world, what we can do is boycott all products that come from Israel, call for an end to trade with Israel, picket outside shops, not just passively boycott, but lobby, mobilize, tell people why you're doing that, complain to shop managers, make a fuss, make companies aware. Companies are very scared of boycotts. Also, ultimately, for instance, like Barclays Bank, when you target specific companies, in our case, we targeted Barclays for many years, and eventually they did pull out of apartheid South Africa, partly because once they see what side of history is the right side of history is going to win out, they want to be part of it. So it's perfectly possible. Companies will react. Companies don't like to be targeted. And if you have clear demands, and we have targeted boycotts, I think it's perfectly possible to put an economic squeeze on apartheid Israel.
Now, as the South African BDS Coalition coordinator, what is your call in similar fashion for individuals in South Africa who are pro-Palestine?
We're calling for a boycott on all products made in Israel, and we're asking people, please send the coalition pictures and store locations so we can, all of us together, compile a list and know which products are where, and complain, write to managers, complain to shop managers, picket outside shops. Next Saturday we're targeting Cape Union Mart because the owner, Philip Kravitz, is one of the most complicit South African businesses. If he's going to trade as a proudly South African, we're demanding that he stop sending money to the apartheid Israel war effort. We don't want our money going to bombs for against children in Gaza. We're calling on him to take a stand. Otherwise, we're going to refuse to buy from his shops. We're going to picket and protest outside of the Cape Union Marts next Saturday. The other targets are McDonald's, Burger King and Pizza Hut because they have been giving free meals to the occupation force soldiers, even though, and they're so scared, before even calling for a boycott, McDonald's South Africa issued a statement trying to distance themselves from their parent company. But we're saying, no, that's not enough. Why don't you call on your parent company to stop this, stop supporting the genocide taking place against the Palestinian people? So yes, I think people around South Africa are going to be taking action, and we're going to continue and put pressure on companies and on our government until we can till we can see at the very minimum a ceasefire.
Roshan Dadoo, South African BDS Coalition coordinator, appreciate your time this evening.